Greyhawk Grognard here. If you like the video, please make sure to like and subscribe. Hit the bell so you get notified. You know, all that other good stuff that all the channels say. And feel free to visit my blog and my Patreon. Links are down below. Now, enjoy the show. Hey everybody, Greyhawk Grognard here, back with another video. Apologies for being silent for so long. I've been battling a nasty virus all week, and this is the first time I've actually felt good enough to be on camera. So, my last video, I talked about the difference between location-based adventures and plot-based adventures. And one of the comments, and I apologize, I forget who it was, said that it would be an interesting idea to tease out what might happen in those plot-based adventures if the adventurers fail. And I thought that was a great idea, so that's what we're going to do today. So I'm going to start off with a pretty easy one, which is also one of my favorites, the Giant / Drow series of modules. You know, quick recap, Hill Giants, Frost Giants, and Fire Giants are all attacking the lands of men. Local lords send the adventurers into the mountains to stop them and find out what's behind them. They go into the Underdark. It turns out it was the Drow, well, a faction of the Drow, and the adventurers go in and rattle around Errol-High Kinlu for a while, and in theory they stop Eclavdra and Clan Isleserves and the minions of the Elder Elemental God, and thus they stop the deprivations of the Giants. As written, it doesn't really play out that way all that smoothly, as I've discussed on my blog ad infinitum, and I'm sure you've all heard me talk about it. But it does raise an interesting question. What happens if the adventurers fail to stop the Giants? What happens if they never find Errol-High Kinlu, or they never realize that it's just one clan of Drow behind it? And yes, I am saying Drow and Drow interchangeably. Sue me. So what happens if the Giants are allowed to keep going on? This is one of the instances where one of the sequel modules actually could be really, really useful in this. And I've got here a copy of Against the Giants, The Liberation of Jeff, or Joff. And this actually, not only does it contain a reprint of the first three Giants modules, but it also gives you a great idea for what it would look like if the Giants win. Because in this module, and the method, the theorizing behind this particular module is weak. It kind of just says, 10 years have gone by and the Giants won anyway. So, okay. But if the Giants do win, if the PCs do lose, you can use the description of Joff as a location for what happens a couple years down the road as the Giants, you know, they get more and more powerful, they win more and more victories, and eventually they conquer a human kingdom. And this is what it looks like. So this is a great thing to have in your back pocket, just in case the PCs do flub their mission. I know what you were thinking I was going to say, and I wasn't. No. But this gives you a great idea of what to use for that alternate scenario of, okay, now we have to roll up new characters and go back, and let's say a year or two has gone by, and this is what they have to face now. So I like that idea of the symmetry of you go from that original into this weak sequel, and you turn the weak sequel into a really nice alternate history. What do we do, you know, when we messed up the first time? So that's my first one. Second one is we've got another great plot-based adventure, the Slavers, A1 through 4. And, you know, we've got you know, the slave pits of the Undercity, and we've got what are those called? Secrets of the Slaver Stockade, and Assault on the Area of the Slave Lords, and none of those count. When you look through the structure of the adventure as it's laid out, nothing that you do in these modules matters. As long as you go from one module to the next, it's completely irrelevant. Everything in this entire adventure series hinges on one encounter at the end of this module. That's the encounter on the docks in Suderham, just as the volcano's exploding, the city's about to be destroyed, and they're on the docks, and the slave lords are between them and the only boat out of town. That's the key of this entire series. Now, they could die or lose here too, and not even make it here. But even if they play perfectly, all that doesn't matter, because at the beginning of this module, they've lost everything. They've lost all their equipment, they've lost their weapons and armor, and they're in a dungeon. So nothing that happened before, except possibly the gathering of a little information, matters at all. It all comes down to that one battle between the wounded slave lords and the really equipment light player characters. And that's the key to this. And if you focus on that one moment, it makes you remember that the slave lords are pretty much blitzed anyway. All of their treasure is in Suderham. A bunch of the slave lords themselves are already dead by the time you get to that encounter. The PCs have nothing to do with this. This is all the Deus Ex Machina of the earthquake and volcano. This has all been taken care of before this one critical encounter. The PCs don't kill anybody. The PCs don't take the treasure. They don't do anything. They just show up, and all of this other stuff's been done for them. So regardless of what the PCs do at all, they don't even have to play the first 3 modules. They could just teleport in at that one moment, and it would all play out the same. I know, a cynical view of a beloved series of modules, but there it is. That being said, if the PCs win that battle, then obviously they, everything proceeds as one might expect. If the PCs lose that battle, though, what happens to those remaining 6 slave lords? They don't have the vast majority of their treasure. Most of their army is gone. Their main base is gone. And, it's they're basically set back to not exactly beginning, because they do have their agents everywhere, and they've got a bunch of ships in the Woolly Bay and the Sea of Gernat and so forth, and they've got bases on the coast, so they're not completely wiped out, but they're really, really set back. And basically, it just starts over. You're going to see probably a pulling back of the slave lords' activities, the raids and stuff, just because they don't have the infrastructure behind it to keep it going. But they're going to get that back soon enough. They've been doing these raids for a couple of years now. They know how to do this. They're going to quickly, because they haven't lost their ships. They haven't lost their actual slave raiders. They haven't lost their coastal bases. They've, I'm sure, got plenty of slaves to sell to raise capital if needed. So it's a big setback for them. But that's all it is. They're gonna be there again in a year or two at exactly the same point that they were, and a new group of PCs is going to have to come around and try to stop them. And if they don't, barring another volcano erupting under their base, which I would hope they would choose a better base, then there's other ways to manage it. But they don't really seem to have territorial designs so much as they just want wealth and power and more slaves. So the slave raids continue and probably expand, like we see in the later module Slavers. There's some stuff in here that you could use for that scenario. It's not nearly as useful as the Liberation of Joff in that respect, but there's some stuff in here that you could use. This does presuppose that you're post-wars, so the Empire of the Pomage is in existence. And, that gives them a bigger base and so forth. That's kind of stuff you'd have to work with if you're before wars. So like I say, there's some stuff in here you could use for that scenario. But really, all they want to do is just keep getting slaves and so forth. I mean, Turosh Mac is still out there, wants to, conquer the Pomage and the southern wild coast and so forth. So, they're doubtless going to have interactions with him. No getting around that. But, so they might be involved in his empire in a more direct way at that point, but that might happen either way. So, so in this case, I call it a draw, a strategic draw, if the PCs fail, because the slave lords are just going to go do what they're going to do anyway. They're just set back a couple of years. And that leaves my favorite of modules, the Temple of Elemental Evil, which also includes, of course, the Village of Hamlet. And this is the biggest what if out there, I think, because we saw, in this module, they tell you what happened the first time that the temple rose, and, they started, the temple started originally the same way it's restarting in this module. They, they have agents in places, they're using brigands and bandits to raise funds and recruit and gain power and terrorize the locals. The big question is, if the PCs fail here, the question is, at what point does Zuchtmoy get freed from the interdicted prison? And I think it's fair to say that she would at some point. I know Ayuz is kind of slow walking doing it because he's got his own stuff going on. But at some point he's going to realize that because this was his original thought process the first time the temple was coming, was that having that threat on the southern border of Nyrond and Furiondi, diverting their attention from his border, is going to be useful. And it's certainly not going to come from the Lort Mill Mountains, because all the humanoids have been driven out. It's not going to come from Selene. It's not going to come, from anywhere else. So while he's during the events of this module, while Ayuz is doing well enough without her, at some point he's going to direct his minions to just go ahead and free her, if only to have that ally back, because he's going to need that ally as he gears up his war that's coming, as we know, in 585. So sooner or later, Zuchtmoy is getting freed, and when that happens, one of two things is going to happen. Either the Grand Alliance is going to reform and crush her again, which is what Ayuz wants, because he wants the distraction, and while that's happening, he's going to have a freer hand to start invading places like the Bandit Kingdoms, and the Horn Society, and the Vesve Forest, and High Folk. And what my guess would be is, because that distraction is now coming at a later time, when he's better poised to launch his great campaign of invasion, he's going to do better, because there's going to be fewer armies of Furiondi to oppose him and threaten a counterstrike, because they're going to be down south dealing with the temple and its forces. So that is my prediction of what would happen geopolitically, is that the re-rise of the temple helps Ayuz in his strategic plan to attack in the north of the Flanness, and because Furiondi is distracted. And I know that some people out there are probably going to say, well, Grognard, why don't you just go into Temple of Elemental Evil? Because it's an abomination, and never use it. It's awful. That's why. And I don't need to say anything else. Seriously, you know how much I hate that? Why would you even mention that? I thought you were my friend.